Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of Let's Talk podcast, enriching life through a podcast. Your go to show for inspiration, motivation, practical strategies to enhance your life. I'm your host, Saurabh Gupta, always thrilled to bring you closer to the movers and shakers of our time. Today, we have a remarkable woman who has built her career on empowering others to find voice or their voices and realize their full potential. She is the woman who started her journey in the bustling classroom of New York City, sharpened her skills in Denver's public schools with the backing of renowned Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And then she made a move to a sun-soaked tech hub of San Francisco, where she founded her leadership consulting firm. Our paths crossed as a session at Microsoft, where her presentation on insightful listening and situational fluency was so thought provoking. I still remember leaving that session feeling incredibly inspired and more equipped to navigate the complexity of communication and leadership. She is an educator, facilitator, a certified coach, phenomenal communication strategist. I was going through some of my research and I found that whatever she says now or maybe 10 years back, it's so much consistent. I mean, it shows that she has done a lot of research and spent a lot of time in honing her skills and obviously inspiring so many people from tech giants to a world of finance, insurance, retail, law, countless lives with her unique approach and insights. Her name is Maria Iams, with staggering 2 decades of teaching and learning under her belt. She's on a mission to inspire others to become the best version of themselves. Her workshops not only are fun and engaging, but also has proven incredibly beneficial, empowering individuals to communicate more effectively and lead with confidence. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have her in the show. Maria, welcome to the show here.
Thank you for having me. It's so great to be here.
Definitely. So let's get started. Communication, which is so basic, yet so much. I mean, it's not that much research, or I would say, if research on an individual level, people do not spend that much time on communication. What do you think? I mean, or maybe I would say, how you started in communication. What do you think, and what compels you that? Let me just go to this route.
Okay. Well, there's a few things that come to mind with that question.
Yes.
I would say the first thing that happened is that I became a communication major in school. I was doing a lot of things when I went to my undergrad. I wanted to be a writer. No, I wanted to be an attorney. No, I wanted to do this. I wanted to do that. And I decided that communication would span all industries no matter what I went into. And so I became a communication major and I absolutely fell in love with this idea of helping people have more impact when they spoke and when they
Hmm.
listened. And communication for me is connection. It's finding ways to bridge the gap between people. It's finding ways to understand them and to always be on this journey of how to better articulate what it is that you want to say. So I'm fascinated with relationships and how people interact, and so I was drawn to the study of communication. And then from there, it's been prevalent in my life no matter what I've done.
Exactly. I think that also shows, isn't it common for everyone, apart from maybe certain individuals, that they are still exploring different professions, different trajectories in their life when they are a kid, when they're growing up? Sometimes they feel that maybe I'm good in sports,
Hmm.
good in maybe some studies, science, technologies, philosophy, and so on and so forth. Eventually, it's a path of like self-reflection and self-awareness. What are the things which we really get into the path of satisfaction and gratification? So before getting into some intricacies of communication, what's your advice to the younger people here who are still working out what would be my path in my life. Do I have to go with a successful career? And when I say successful, it would be success in terms of the society.
Mm,
Do I have to get a success in terms of when I sleep at night, I have a smile on my face, a sense of satisfaction? Or how do I balance? Because without money, if I'm not kind of maybe into much money, then how do I balance these things? What's your, because you must have gone through all those things when you were deciding on your profession.
yeah. I was just talking to my daughter about this. So I have a 17-year-old, and as you can imagine, she's starting to look at schools so she can think about what does she want to do. And we were having this very frank conversation about balancing something that you're super passionate about and a career that is going to allow you to make money so that you can live a lifestyle that you desire. And personally, what I chose to do is follow something I was super passionate about. And I was so poor at the start of my career because I was a teacher.
Hmm.
And teachers traditionally in the United States do not make a lot of money at all. I was getting paid once a month. And so I always was running out of money at like day 25. I couldn't make the next 5 to 6 days, which is so challenging. And I mean, I could talk about the state of education and teaching and learning in the United States for a long time. But I think that you have to find that like sweet spot of like doing something that you're passionate about because it will open doors for you that you didn't realize existed. I didn't know that I would be doing this, although what I'm doing now is what I've always wanted to do. I just didn't know how to get there.
Hmm.
And so by following that passion journey, I was able to get to the place that I ended up getting to. I think that technology has completely changed what jobs are going to look like. And even in 4 or 5 years, when she graduates from school, there will be jobs that existed that don't exist now, and vice versa. So I think the bottom line is like keeping an open mind and thinking about the skills that you're learning that can transfer anywhere. And being able to connect with people is one of those skills.
Yes, I agree. I think you mentioned connection. So, I mean, this is also something which I have read somewhere that when you are in the actual mode of learning, the world is your library. So, uh, when you try to put yourself out there for certain things, you will start observing those things,
Hmm.
which it seems like wasn't there in the first place, but it was always. It's just like you are not even prepared. Uh,
Right.
so you mentioned about the connection here. So in as the nature of communication evolved, uh, back in the day, maybe in primitive time, we have a bonfire. An elderly person comes, and all the kids and everyone we kind of listening to the stories and understanding and get some life lessons. And now we are getting into the mode, and obviously it has exploded in these 2 decades. The way how the communication works, it's a hybrid of online and kind of face-to-face communication.
Hmm.
So, what's your perspective on that? The way how the communication has evolved. What are the strategies people kind of look forward to improve their communication on a regular basis?
Hmm. Well, like you said, some things have changed, but some things have stayed the same. And the one thing that has stayed the same is the power of storytelling.
Hmm.
That is something that we are raised on. It's something that we crave. We love a narrative structure. So people who tell good stories have more impact. So that's one thing. I would also say that short form content is what is trending right now. People go to social media to learn things very quickly. So whether it's in a podcast or whether it's on one of the social media platforms, it's like go on, learn what you want to learn and get out. And that is because our attention spans have decreased. So, one of the things that we can think about is how can I create content or how can I create something meaningful in a really short, snackable bite so that people take it and apply it?
Agree. I think that's where the industry is moving. just to quickly grab the attention. And then, obviously, if they are interested, they can get into, for example, in our case, a long form to understand more, because that is just a kind of a teaser in a way to make them understand that there's a lot of valuable content coming in. So, based on your experience regarding communication across cultures,
Mhm.
and this is something it takes time for a lot of folks, including me as well. So, I'm basically from India. We
Mhm.
have a different way of having communication. When I came here, took me some time. Obviously, you have to be intentional to understand. But in those learning period, you may have some speed bumps. You may get some uh, feedbacks which you are not expecting, because on the other side of the house they may expect you in a certain way to communicate. So what's your suggestion on that, like when people are communicating across cultures, or even within the United States? I've seen West Coast, East Coast has a different style of communication. So what do you think about certain tips around getting the thing started in the right way?
Yeah. I have two ideas about that. And one is the notion that we are more similar than we think. So, some recent research came out around cues, social cues. And for a long time, it was thought that different cultures around the world projected different social cues. And what they found is that that's really not accurate. The biggest social cue or nonverbal cue that is different is eye contact. So that makes sense, right? In different cultures, it's more, in the Western hemisphere, we like a lot of eye contact. In the Eastern hemisphere, it's a little bit different. But everything else was very similar. Posture and gestures and voice tonality and all of those things were similar. So I think one thing to remember is we're more similar than we think. On the flip side, what you brought up with, what do you think about communicating across different cultures and even on the West Coast, East Coast? And I would say, and even in industries and even in different companies, the
Yeah.
culture is always, everything has its unique culture. So, one of my recommendations is to be an observer, to be like a researcher, and to watch how people communicate. What is the currency of communication in those different aspects? How are people making that connection and gaining understanding? So observe first and then try to adjust. You're not being inauthentic, you're being savvy and flexible in your communication, which is something that we do all the time. I mean, think about it. You probably talk differently to your mother than you talk to your sister, than you talk to your kids, than you talk to person at the grocery store. So we're really good at this. So we can take that and we can apply it when we're trying to communicate to different people and across different cultures.
That's great. Would you like to give any kind of an example or something which you have came across?
I can think about the different cultures
Hmm.
at different in different industries because I work across industries
Yes.
all the time.
Hmm.
So if I'm speaking to people in the tech industry, one of the things that I notice is not only the language they use, but the speed at which they communicate. So when I go into conversation with somebody who works in tech, I'm a little bit faster in my pace. We use a certain language to connect. When I'm speaking with people who are not in the tech industry, conversations sound different. They take a little bit more time. They're a little bit more circular. I ask more questions. And so I'm not being inauthentic. I'm just adjusting the way that I communicate because I know that I'm going to have more impact and stay more relevant based on who my audience is.
That's fascinating. So that's interesting. So you mentioned from the tech, yeah. So is it like because the way how the people, their professional lives are, they wire their brain in a way that to consume or process the things much faster, or is that something you have learned so far?
Yeah, I think it's the nature of the industry
Mhm.
because one of the things about technology is that it's often disruptive and things are always changing. And so the people who typically work in that industry have grown that muscle, if you
Yeah.
will, of being very adaptive and this is, data is coming out all the time, research coming out all the time. And not that it's not in under other industries, it's just the speed of which it is changing and coming out in the tech industry is different. So
Yeah.
there's this. notion of just being a little bit more flexible, and the pace is faster.
Yes, now you mention, I'm thinking like they maybe we are so, for example, like me as a technology person as well, we are so much into a similar kind of conversations every
Mhm.
time, like having a lot of calls, a lot of learnings, a lot of conferences within, a lot of leadership, education, and those things. I think it wired that this is something like we can quickly process those things.
Yeah. Hmm.
And one of the important point you mentioned is being an authentic, but at the same time be flexible and
Hmm.
pivot. And this is again one of the session you mentioned about situational fluency in our at
Yeah.
Microsoft, where I learned that being authentic doesn't mean that you have to be rigid or try, oh, this is the way I am. It's just like obviously you have to have that this is the way how I communicate, but at the same time have to include a flexibility to ensure that the message you are conveying that goes to the intended audience and recipients in the way you would like to receive it as well.
Hmm.
So from that perspective, now you mentioned about different communication style. From leadership, there's a notion again. Sometimes people mention that once you become maybe a senior leader or executive leader, it's granted that you must have some sort of communication already, right? A good one. That's why you reach to that. But then at the same time, personalities and coaches like you who are getting to the executive communication strategists, the question is why people, senior leadership or middle management maybe, need
Hmm.
a communication strategy if it's given that they already have those in their personality. If
Hmm.
that makes sense.
Yeah. I would say it's a little bit of a fallacy to assume that
Yeah.
just because somebody becomes a leader means that they're a great communicator. And what we see all the time is that what got you to that point doesn't quite get you to the next point in your career.
Hmm. Okay.
And a lot of really savvy executives realize very quickly that they would like some support with their communication because they're communicating at a different level to a different audience and they want to have different impact. And so a lot of our work is focused at that level. And what we find is that those executives that can put some of those strategies into place, they can show up as their authentic and in some cases vulnerable selves, which endear people to them and they create this like leadership following. So it's this lovely thing that happens when people go into those positions and they think, oh, I'm good, I've made it. That's when the learning stops. And
You there?
yes.
Okay, I don't know what happened. Yeah, yeah, please go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just talking about the growth mindset.
Yes.
So constantly having that growth mindset enables people to keep reaching to that next level. When you have a fixed mindset, that's when we see people kind of get into trouble in their learning and
Yes.
realize that they don't have anything else to learn.
Yes. So I have one question again because while I try to process these things, at the same time I talk to a lot of people. So you mentioned about it helps leader. Obviously, they are there, but what it takes to get to the next level. And you mentioned about the growth mindset. Now, in that perspective, what do you think about if I take an example like I would like to be a senior leader. I'm taking all the right step. I'm learning about the communication, understanding that how we have to communicate.
Hmm.
Now, there is a realm where you may over communicate. You get into that, oh, I want to be vulnerable. But
Hmm.
again, there's always a saying like everything in moderation is good. And this is where I have seen a lot of people ask questions like, what is that boundary? If I
Hmm.
communicate, how do I know if I'm over communicating? and
Mm,
it becomes a kind of a challenge for the people. What's your perspective? What do you think about over communication, and what are maybe key things which you can suggest for people?
mm. When I think about over communication, I think about not having a filter to edit out what is important versus what is interesting. And in that case, what I would recommend is using some structure to the communication. If people are over communicating, they're probably doing a little bit of rambling. They
Hmm.
probably don't think about the how of their communication, maybe just the what. So, structures like story is a good one. Even things like first, second, third would be helpful. And finally, being more mindful about what they're saying and why they're saying it. A lot of times, what I talk to my senior leaders about is okay, that's the what. What's the so what? What's the impact of that? Because
Yes.
sometimes they don't realize how much weight their words hold.
Yeah, I think that's so profound. As a communicator, a lot of people, and I'm kind of myself, I'm trying to control in that way what we say, tame your advice monster, that when we try to communicate, we can go to a monologue. There's
Mm-hmm.
always, we are prone to go to a monologue, as you mentioned, that we have to be very mindful, structured, and I think also take some pauses in between so that people process, because the way how you are processing is not always the people processing in the same speed.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your take on talking slowly, taking pauses, and or any those kind of verbal or non-verbal cues? Because communication, the very first thing comes to the mind is talking
Mm-hmm.
or vocal stuff, right? What about other things which is maybe not so evident?
Yeah. Well, nonverbal communication is so powerful. Even if you can't see somebody, you can hear a smile in their voice, and their voice can indicate how interested they are or disinterested. And so, one of the things I would recommend is paying attention to how you are literally showing up with your nonverbals. In fact, this was something that fascinated me so much when I was first studying communication because you know it, but you can't really name it until you actually start paying attention to it. And it can be the difference between people leaning in and listening to you and not. So, paying attention to nonverbals and maximizing the power of the pause. A lot of people don't pause because they don't want to be interrupted. And what they found, what studies show, is that when you pause, you're actually holding more space. So it is less likely for people to interrupt you when you can put in those powerful pauses in between what you're saying. And then to jump to something related, but a little bit different, you're talking about leadership and giving advice and talking too much or something in that vein. So moving away from nonverbal communication just for a second, thinking about leadership strategies. Something that I've studied pretty extensively is leadership. I'm a leadership consultant. I have a master's in leadership. And something I always talk to my leaders about is when do you direct? When do you coach? When are you consulting? When are you teaching? There are different modalities that you adopt as a leader. So, again, it's not about being inauthentic, it's about knowing what strategy is going to work when with which audience member. So, there's a lot. Being direct and teaching and maybe offering advice is one of those things. You don't want to stay in that vein all the time. Depending on where your audience is, you want to do different things as a way of motivating and inspiring action. You got to be
Yeah.
mindful about it.
Yeah. So basically, what you're saying is you have to wear different hats.
Mm-hmm.
And this also sparked me. I read somewhere that sometimes leader speaks last. They try to listen to everyone because that's how they observe that
Mm-hmm.
do I have to go with a monologue? Do I have to go for a big presentation? And as you mentioned, that it depends on what kind of conversation we are having with whom and
Mhm.
how. So, in the remote world, leaders have a lot of challenges in having a right communication. For example, a lot of I would say mid managers or mid level managers and leaders, they haven't seen their colleagues or their team members for years.
Mhm.
So in those, they have their own challenges because, for example, uh, most of the team members may not open up their camera,
Mhm.
and you're having these team meetings, for example. So some of the leaders mentioned that I do not know, like in order to have those connection, in order to have the proper communication, I'm still not very sure because I'm just hearing voice. Obviously, I can make a most out of it, but then that visual interaction is not possible. And I think you must have came across these questions a lot in this
Yeah.
hybrid world. What's your advice and what's your take on that?
Oh, it's so tricky. At the beginning of the pandemic, when we were all virtual, one of the things that everybody was saying is turn your cameras on and let's be on camera. And what we learned very quickly is that that is absolutely exhausting. It is so hard to be on
Yeah,
camera all day. And the reason for that is because typically, if you're not using that hide self view, you're looking at yourself. It's like you're looking in a mirror all day, and we are not wired to be looking at ourselves all day. It's very taxing on us. And so then we've kind of shifted to, oh, be on camera only for important meetings. And you don't have to be on camera for some meetings. But what we also know is when people are not on camera, they're multitasking and they're not fully present. The bottom line is that there's not a great solution. What I'm seeing right now is that people are really prioritizing the in person moments. So I have been to a lot of offsites this month already, and it is the first time that people are getting together in person in 3 years. So that is one thing. And then the second thing is thinking about those moments where it makes sense to be on camera. So maybe it's a difficult conversation, or maybe it's a career conversation, or something where you really want to build that connection. You want all of your nonverbals and you want to see the nonverbals of that person. And then being flexible as to why people can't be on camera. They're probably tired. Maybe they've got something going on in the background that they don't want people to see. So, to answer your question, there's not there's not a one answer
one
to that
answer.
question. It's challenging.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you mentioned some one important point is that instead of like having all or nothing, you can have a right balance, and maybe you can see that what are the conversations you can have with the on camera, so that
Mm-hmm.
we can have those conversation. And again, there is no one answer, but we can be intentional. And at least if we believe to be in camera, for example, then be on camera and then show your best self, I guess, in that
Mm-hmm.
way, so that at least people know that what your intentions are
Right.
in that perspective, and maybe encourage them. And you're saying offside, yeah, I think that is it just like a typical, after all, we are human beings, so we have to have that face to face. And this is something, I mean, in future, you never know if our podcasts have a studio, and then we can bring guests like you to
Right.
have those, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's so much data around. We look first to people's eyes and then we look to their hands to decide, like, can I trust you? Can I make that connection? And so when we don't have those things, it's really hard for us to build that relationship so quickly. I mean, it can be done, it just takes a longer time.
Yes, yes. So let's get into one last question, and then maybe I'll ask a few questions which I generally ask to all the guests here. Any takeaways from the communication side, which you can provide to the listeners in terms of, okay, irrespective of whatever the stage of journey you are in communication, because everyone is a communicator in certain way,
Mhm,
because we are talking to our family or anyone else, right?
mhm.
How to get to the next step, any
Yeah.
like two or three steps you would like? Only just next step, not all the things which we mentioned, just the next step. What's your advice around that?
My advice is to work on your listening skills. People are not great listeners. A lot of times, people are in their own heads thinking about what they want to say. And if you can hone your listening skills and be responsive and relevant in a conversation, you are going to be a better communicator.
Amazing. So I think that intrigued me. One more question, which I would like to kind of have your perspective. Why listening skills are so difficult to attain? Is it because of the way how human works, or is it because the way how we raised up of being in a front runner of talking things or do certain things, not like a teamwork, but you have to be first in your class, you have to be top in the soccer team, you have to make goals, or whatever the case may be. What's your perspective? Why we struggle with listening skills?
That is such a great question. I have no idea. My thought is that we don't see it modeled well in our lives.
Hmm.
And the people who do a great job listening, we don't even realize that they are practicing excellent active listening skills. All we know from interactions from them is that we feel heard
Hmm.
and appreciated. So I think that's what people are walking away from and not saying, oh, that person was such a great listener.
Yes, yeah, that's so fascinating, just to be
Mhm.
heard and appreciated. Uh, that's fascinating. So let's get into the last round, the three questions which I generally ask to all the guests here. Is how do you define leadership in one word?
How do I define leadership? Okay. This is challenging. I mean, the first thing that came to mind is how I define communication, which is connectedness.
Hmm.
I think leadership though has an aspect of being a visionary.
Visionary.
And
Hmm.
okay, this is not one word.
I know, but that's a trick question as
Okay.
well.
Visionary connectedness. No, that's not even a word. Yeah, I would say vision.
Vision. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I put these questions deliberately just to make people think as well. I know it's not possible in one word, but it's always interesting to see
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
people come up with that one word.
Mhm.
So, vision is something which you can think of as a leadership, one word.
Mhm.
The second question would be any recommendations on communication focused books which people should read at least once in their lifetime,
My
which
God.
maybe have profound effect in your life?
There are so many. There are too many. I get asked this question all the time.
Yeah.
And I would say it really depends on what it is you're working on. For a
Mm.
long time, people were like, I want to be better at influencing. So there are books on influence. The most recent one that came out is by Zoe Chance called Influence is Your Superpower. She's a
Mhm.
researcher at Yale. She's done a ton of work around influence and what makes people influential. A lot of people really like Vanessa Van Edwards' books. She's got Captivate and Cues. These are very basic, but very easily implementable strategies to help you show up as a better communicator, connector, better listener. So I love those. I love Difficult Conversations. It was put out by the Harvard Negotiation Project years ago. I have like two copies of it. It is just a classic on how to have difficult conversations. So, my answer is depending on what aspect of communication you want to get better at, there's something out there for you.
Very good. I think that's a amazing advice. You mentioned that you have to find out what are you looking for because you have a sea of options here. So that's a great, and definitely these are the books which you mentioned. I'll see if I can put it in my list
Yeah.
as well as one of the things. Okay, so the last question is what one advice you got from your mentor which really sticks around in your life, specifically around the time when the things are not going as per your expectations?
Mm. When I was in education, the biggest lesson I learned is to wait on it. Now, for some people that doesn't might not make a lot of sense, but for somebody like me, I tend to jump in and try to solve and fix, and a lot of that time is wasted spinning my wheels. And what I learned from this particular person is that if I just take a little time and exude a little patience, which is hard for me, sometimes things just end up working out. Not all the time, but I started doing that when I had this position in leadership, and what I found is that the people around me were the ones who started solving and fixing the problem, and so by the end of the day it wasn't mine anymore. So something like that might resonate with you, or maybe you're on the other side of it and you're like, "Oh, I need to have a little bit more like get in there and dig in." But for me, my personality, that's definitely something that I try to do even now.
Makes sense, completely sense. Just do a few things and then have a patience.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I would add patience, but not procrastination.
Right. Not I mean, I still
Yeah.
would hold on to it, but it's really about patience, and even more so than patience, it's about trust, and trusting that the people around you are going to be able to figure it out and solve. And then as a leader, it's really your job, if you're noticing that that's not happening, to then maybe step in, remove some roadblocks, offer some strategies, but not to rush in and solve. And I see this as a place where leaders, newer leaders especially, get into trouble because they're doing and not necessarily leading. And then they're exhausted.
That's a great way to end today's conversation. You're focusing on doing, not leading. Have patience, self evaluate, try to understand what kind of communication you would like to enhance before getting into uh, the sea of information and again going back to the ground zero. So
Mhm.
that being said, Maria, thank you so much for providing such a valuable insights. I learned a lot. Definitely will re-listen and watch this episode, and I wish you all the best for your future endeavors.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Definitely.